Strixhaven continues the recent web fiction trend of serving up 5 side stories to help round out the world building and support the main narrative. In these stories, we follow prominent students as they navigate their educational and personal growth, all whilst learning about the college and Arcavios. On today's MTG Book Club, we will be focusing on the Prismari Mage Rootha Squallhart and the journey she goes on to discover her artistic voice. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today we are going to be looking at another MTG web fiction story. This is part of our MTG Book Club series, although for our second episode, we've completely broken the format, and instead of looking at something in the back catalogue, we're looking at something that got released like 2 or 3 weeks ago, which, whatever.
It was meant to be broken.
Well, yeah, almost immediately it seems. So we are looking today at the side story for Strixhaven, the first side story following the Prismari student Rootha Squallhart, written by Aysha U, Farah, A Cry of Magic. But before we get into that, Nathan, I've got some bad news for you. We're going to have to stop doing this podcast, or at least I'm going to have to stop doing this podcast with you, I think.
Okay, so why?
I did something the other day that I objectively, in my sort of spectral projection, looking back at myself, I was like, oh no, that's too nerdy. You need to stop now. I was part of a conversation. There's a couple of people in my office who play Magic as well, which is pretty cool. Get to talk about Magic, whatever. And one of them was talking about the card from Kaldheim, Sigrid God Favored, the White Legendary. And they went, oh, whenever I read, this was to the other person, this wasn't to me. Oh, whenever I read this card, I always read it as Sigrid God Flavored. And before the other person could respond, I turned around in my desk and opened my mouth to speak and then immediately stopped. But they spotted it and went, no, go on, what were you going to say? No, it's fine. No, go on, what were you going to say?
Oh, no.
And then I proceeded to explain how if there was going to be a character called Sigrid God Flavored, canonically and sort of flavorfully, it should be in Kaldheim, because if any of the pantheon of gods across the multiverse were to have a distinct flavor, it would possibly be the Kaldheim gods, because they drink the tree sap. And
right.
So if they were to have a flavour, it would potentially be something akin to maple syrup, which would make sense because that's what they drink to be gods.
Mm.
And then I turned around in my seat and I didn't talk again for the rest of the day. And I think I need to stop now because this is too nerdy.
I don't know. I mean, immediately that sparks off 3 or 4 conversation points for me. So I don't know if quitting the podcast is the best way to exercise these demons from your body. It might be the only way to do so. I genuinely think that, obviously, yeah. I mean, the Ambrosia analog, right, for the sap thing. Yeah, I mean,
Sure.
I guess. Yeah, God flavored. I mean, it's also spelt wrong, right? I'm looking at the card now, and they've not even spelled it right.
I know. Tell me about it, Christ.
So the less we have to say about Sigrid, the better, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, there we go.
Fantastic.
Well, all right, maybe I won't quit the podcast then, but I'm just
No,
letting you know,
you're
I'm
stuck with me. Sorry, buddy. You don't get that out that easy.
So, all right, let's move on then to A Cry of Magic. So, if you didn't hear our previous MTG Book Club episode, essentially what we're doing is we're looking back at different bits of web fiction from across Magic's history, or at least the archives that are on the Mothership website, and reading them in sort of isolation of what they are as individual stories and as part of larger narratives as well, if they feed into it. Last time we spoke about the story Family Values, which followed the Orzhov Advocist Taser Karlov, and what that meant in that period of time. But this week we are doing something a bit more immediate. So again, A Cry of Magic is the first of the side stories for Strixhaven, which is obviously the latest set at time of recording, and it's written by Aysha U, Farah, who we've sort of looked at, hasn't done anything else for Magic, but is a published author and has written several bits and bobs here and there. Part of 5 stories, so again we get 5 side stories, which is pretty cool. And I mean, before we get too deep into this particular story, it's worth noting that a lot of the issues that I know I had, maybe a little bit more so than you, but I know we both had sort of bits and bobs of issues with the main set of stories. One of them being that I wanted to see what living in Strixhaven is actually like, and going to the college and all this kind of thing. And these side stories, all of them, in fact, do that job brilliantly, which I knew they would, just from even looking at their kind of little blurbs about what they were going to be about. So yeah, I'm really happy with these side stories in general. I mean, what do you think about all 5 of them, just kind of as a broadly speaking?
Well, this is what I think is a good idea. This is why I think doing it immediately was fine, because we did have such a reservation on like the scope of the main story that we got from Strixhaven, because again, it wasn't a novel; it was a 5-part articles. So there was only again so much depth that we get and breadth that we're going to get of the world. So I think it's a good thing to look back immediately as something that we complain about when we already have the fix in front of us. And it'd be nice to keep it relevant, because the day in the life of Strixhaven is something that both of us wanted to look at. And again, yeah, these story articles do a very good job of doing that. And again, maybe this is a good sign of going forwards of when they don't have the time to give us the day in the life off and fit it into the articles, because it's a bit too disconnecting, that this will be how they do it, and they give us, you know, the main story that's distracting, talking about planeswalkers, and then they go, right, forget all of that fanciful nonsense, let's see day to day what's going on in like on the ground, as it were. So yes, I mean, maybe this is the kind of thing that would have been better to allow us to see, like, say, Lityar and other places like that in Kaldheim. Obviously their side stories still had a bit of a parallel focus to the main story.
I mean, it's kind of interesting, this one, because this is the third set in a row to have side story, to have web fiction at all, since they brought it back with Zendikar. And with Zendikar and Kaldheim, 2 of the stories out of the 4 for Zendikar and out of the 5 side stories for Kaldheim, 2 of them were sort of direct parallel events with the main storyline, whether it was following a character that kind of fed in, or was just kind of a dovetailing of 2 different storylines that then blended into one. Like, they weren't so much side stories as just like elsewhere on the plane, this is happening, and then they kind of feed into each other. So 2 story slots got kind of taken up with that, which is good in its own way. But yeah, all 5 of these side stories, bar the odd character showing up to kind of tie things together, or sort of background event that is sort of there, but it doesn't directly influence the narrative of any of these stories, or vice versa. These all stand alone as their own, like, separate little chunks of narrative.
Yeah, isolated nuggets.
Yeah. And I really like it. I think it works brilliantly. I would have been a bit upset, actually, if we'd had 2 stories of, you know, Rootha and, I don't know, Dina from the Witherbloom College, like, fighting in the Battle of Strixhaven. I would have been a bit like, oh, all right then, sure, whatever.
Yeah, we didn't need that side of that story. I mean, there's so many names in this set, like there's so many legends in most sets these days, that if we don't get these side stories that pick them up, say the Deans, because there are 2 of them for each college, and then they even specifically say these like honor roll pledge mages that we have, the uncommon legends. If we didn't get to see a bit of them, they just kind of sit in a vacuum. There's a problem with cards like Kakar, or Yarok, where you just don't get any depth to them, and they're really interesting things, like, where is Kakar from? Nobody knows. And how did an Eldrazi elemental horror thing? But these are both really cool concepts that got no depth to them. Obviously Commander Legends did this as well, a bunch of legends that don't have an individual story for them, even though we probably would like to see them. And again, this gives us a chance to kind of tick some of those names off, get some personality traits, world build a little bit greater, especially if you're choosing to make any of these your commander. Now you have a bit of personality to go with it.
Yeah, 100%. So this one is following Rootha Squallhart, who is the Prismari pledge mage, if you like. And yeah, I'm going to give a bit of a story breakdown for this one. These are, as I say, individual stories, but there is still quite a lot going on in each one of them. So yeah, I'll run down the sort of story beats, if you like. I will also put the article web thing, link, name, address. That's the one. I'll do that. I'll put that in the description box below. I don't know what it is, whatever it is. The more tech-savvy society becomes, the less we need
the
to worry
HTML
about.
thing. Yeah, the
HTML.
the blue text.
God, like your parents sort of go, oh, remember to put HTTP / like semicolon in front of whatever. No, you don't need to do that. Okay, yeah, I'll put the link in the description box below. If you haven't already read it, please read along with us, or read it and then come back to this episode. But here is the breakdowns. Spoiler alerts, obviously. So we open up with the story with the office of Prismari Dean Uvilda, Prismari Dean of Perfection, who is having a meeting with Rootha Squallhart, the Orc Prismari student, who is the face student for the Prismari. We find out through this meeting that Rootha has not turned in anything for a critique since the beginning of term. So Prismari students have to create and build and design, or whatever it is that they're doing, and turn in these projects to the deans for critique, so they can give feedback and mentor their students. Rootha attributes the lack of turning in anything for critique to the fact that she already knows the flaws in her own work. So we immediately get the idea that Rootha is her biggest critic overall. We also learn about Rootha's mother, Samara, who is a famous artist, or an artist mage, I should say, on the plane of Arcavios. So Rootha comes from the Squallhart family, and I think she says she's 5th generation of Prismari students from the family.
Yes.
Yes. Uvilda gives Rootha an ultimatum at the end of their meeting. Either she turns in a project for critique, or she is no longer guaranteed a place at the college. So at no point does she say that she's going to kick Rootha out, but it's definitely going to be like your future kind of hangs in the balance for you just, doing some actual fucking work. Rootha leaves the meeting and is greeted immediately by the Efreet mage Nasari, who is the other Prismari Dean, the Dean of Expression. So it's kind of called straight. Like, I know I've been talking for the past few weeks about the flip Dean cards for the Prismari, and it's absolutely banging that we get to see them in this story, which is pretty cool. Nasari offers help to Rootha with her work, claiming to see Rootha a wild magic. Wild magic is the term that gets used for Rootha quite often, and these words literally trigger off negative emotions in Rootha, and therefore she rejects the Dean's help. We're not quite sure what's triggering Rootha at this point in time, but at the phrase wild magic, we sort of have like a flashback. It's worth noting as well, and this is something you're going to talk about a little bit later, Nathan. This story is in first person for Rootha. So when people are talking to her and we see memories, it's like we're having those memories as well. We find Rootha later on in her chambers/studio, because Prismari students get their own art studio as well as a lodging, which is pretty cool. And in this studio, we find that she is drinking liqueur and trying to think of an art piece that could pass critique. So she's looking over all of her past works, trying to think of some new things that she could do. And we also get a second reference to a song that's been stuck in Rootha's head. And the song is a tune that her mother used to sing to her. She first mentions it in the meeting with Dean Uvilda. And through Rootha's thoughts on her own work, we see that she is deeply in the shadow of her mother's talent. So a lot of Rootha's hang-ups that we're starting to see, and a lot of her kind of agitation towards her own work, comes directly from the fact that her mother is a famous artist, and seemingly an incredibly talented one as well. Felisa Fang, who is a Silver Quill vampire student and a Vainglory, which is kind of like I guess a word mage, although the word vain makes it seem like it's kind of vampire specific. I don't know. We can dig into that maybe a little bit later.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little later.
Felisa Fang comes to Rootha's dorm, and we find out about their history together. So they were previously very close and potentially intimate with each other as well. And they had a strong friendship formed when they first arrived at Strixhaven, but recently they have not been in contact with one another. So Rootha's a little bit surprised to see Felisa in her dorm. Felisa is seemingly there to offer encouragement to Rootha about her work, but Rootha very quickly suspects Felisa of using word magic on her rather than genuinely comforting her, and rejects her help in an almost violent fashion as well. She kind of has an outburst to her that sort of fringes on attacking her with magic, we sort of see. The negative memories from earlier also seem to come back to Rootha in that moment. After this encounter, Rootha smashes up one of her projects in a rage and strolls down to Opus Walk, which is a promenade in Strixhaven featuring the past masterpieces of former Prismari students. And she walks down this promenade until she finds her mother's piece, a never-ending waterfall. Rootha looks at the waterfall and half intends to destroy the piece of art, but is calmed and stopped by Dean Nasari, who finds her once again, and the two begin to discuss art in their lives, and Nasari suspects that it was Uvilda who was the one who sent Felisa to her dorm, sort of insinuating that Uvilda was concerned that the Squallhart's generous donations from over the years may be affected by Rootha's artistic block. May have, it's not fully confirmed, may have sent Felisa to the dorm, knowing their history together, to kind of perk Rootha up. Nasari admits to not liking Rootha's mother when Rootha's mother was a student at Strixhaven, and Rootha tells Nasari the tale of her youth that's at the core of her destructive memories and the kind of thing that's plaguing her. So when Rootha was young, sort of like 10, 8, I think she might have said in the story, she badly hurt her younger brother in an uncontrolled outburst of elemental magic, and since then she has been forced to control and curtail her magic for fear of another outburst. And we kind of sort of see that this is what's been holding her back, not only creatively, but in also in forming relationships with others, because she kind of sees herself as kind of too dangerous to be around. Rutha and Nassari eventually reach an area known as the Fury Gale, which is a wasteland where the unfinished elemental projects of the Prismari students are kept and just sort of, I don't know, stored? Is stored the right word? They're there.
They reside there. They refuse to dissipate. So they it's almost like they live there as ghosts of spells,
Mm.
which is just a little bit cool.
Yeah, I know. Again, this is something you want to talk about. I won't step on your
Yeah.
toes. I'll let you talk about that in a minute. Here, Nassari berates Rutha for not leaning into her potential and actually baits her into releasing an elemental blast at Nassari, which Nassari easily parries and uses the blast of energy to form a spray of magic, which is called a spray, which I really like. And this spray of magic hangs in the air and emits the faint echo of Rutha's mother's song. So the kind of combined elemental blast from Rutha and Nassari's kind of control of it turns it into this sort of living magical art piece. Nassari then uses the energy spray to show Rutha that her raw talent and artistic style is what the thing that she should be pursuing, rather than trying to fit herself into the kind of box that's been created by her family's legacy. Nassari then positions herself as Rutha's mentor, because Rutha was previously under the mentorship of Avilda, and refers to Rutha as a long-term investment. And that's kind of where we leave the story off. That's the sort of very quick crib notes of what's going on. There's a lot more sort of nuances and character developments going on in there, but unless you want me to literally just read the story to you, that's the kind of story.
Don't offer that. They'll say yes. They'll make us do
it. There are Twitch streamers who do it, so yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. So yeah, really cool. I really enjoyed this story. I think Aysha's writing is really cool. I actually quite liked the first person's perspective. You weren't too keen on it, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't know why. I guess the only thing that it kind of rubbed me up against is that I wasn't expecting it from the get-go. They usually do it in like third person, don't they? They usually do a lot of where you see the point of view of the person, but it's almost as if it's like the voice, the view over the shoulder. And I don't know why it grated on me initially, but having said that, getting through to halfway through, the only reason I started to notice it again is because Nassari's distinctly non-gendered binary characters. So all of their pronouns are their pronouns, they, their, that kind of thing. So I think at that point, that's when it reiterated the struggle. Because at that point, it goes from I to there, and then you're kind of having to adjust. I think it's just because most Magic writers don't do that. That it was very noticeable. Sure. And saying I don't like it is more a matter of it is something that I didn't expect. I don't know if it necessarily was.
It's just you noticed it more, so it kind of took you out the story.
Yeah, it broke my immersion a little bit, because I prefer it when I can. I don't know if this is a very strange point to bring up as someone who reads plenty, that the fact that whenever something goes from an I point of view, unless it's exceptionally verbose and it goes into great detail about what they see and what's around them, there's almost like not enough time to get exactly enough feelings out of the people or the characters in these formats. So maybe that's the thing that's a bit disconnecting for me. I would like to see her continue to do this. Again, this is her only story, so I wasn't able to go back and check the other ones and see how I felt about it. It might also be that because it's an orc, I was maybe expecting a slightly different voice, a rougher voice, something like that. I mean, again, it's more interesting because you get to see the sides of people. You get to see characters that will have extremes, right? Imagine having the point of view of, like, say, a dragon, or a point of view of like a troll or something like that. Obviously, the way they're going to speak and the way that they make thoughts is going to be a bit different. So I guess the only thing I feel like you're disconnected was it maybe made her feel a bit too. I know she's a humanoid. I know she's not supposed to be completely different because she's an orc, but there was a lacking of orcness to her.
Well, I guess I slightly disagree with that, because I feel like, I mean, firstly, it's interesting that she's an orc, for one, like bringing that creature type back into the set, because weirdly enough, orcs just don't seem to feature that heavily in Magic, despite being like one of the key fantasy creature types. I guess because goblins are such a huge part of it, that they don't want to kind of, they are very similar, so I suppose. But I kind of felt that there's a line in this which it's when Nassari and Rutha are first talking in this story, and Rutha's sizing Nassari up because Nassari's very informal, and Rutha says Afrits have a reputation of being unpredictable, but then orcs have a reputation of being aggressive. And so I think orcs, it is an orc's voice because she is obviously battling with kind of like this inner fire, but almost to the point where she's too orcish in this kind of thing. I mean, obviously, we don't know much about Arcavios in general. And obviously, like, creatures kind of change from plane to plane to plane as well. Like a sphinx on one plane isn't the same as a sphinx on another plane, and that's just kind of how it goes. Goblins have this kind of thing as well. Goblins seem to change across planes quite dramatically. So I wonder if like orcs are maybe just a little bit more like they are a bit more sort of humanoid and civilized, I guess, or what's going on there. But they've kind of got hints and flashes of their kind of aggressive nature because we don't quite know the full history of Arcavios. I think it's kind of cool though. Something that really struck me across this whole story, and these side stories have answered a lot of stuff for us that I think, when we've been looking at the main stories in isolation and the cards in isolation, like we've done, we've had questions about the kind of barriers of this world. Little things like, what age are the kids in Strixhaven? Do they drink? Because I kind of thought they were drinkers, like they had like Freshers Week or whatever, and you were unsure. But this is very clear, like no. Like they have there's a bar called Bow's End, which seems to be in some of the other stories as well.
Yeah.
So that's a bar that all the students go to I think it's the Witherbloom campus it's in. So we know that they go out drinking, or at least some of the students do, like some of the ones that are of age. And there's all these like little things that are kind of being shown up here and flagged up in the Witherbloom story, the Dina story, which is the one after this one. The idea of the multiverse, because that's been one of the big questions we've been having for a while. It becomes very clear that the students and faculty pretty much know about the multiverse. It's just what they do with that knowledge that kind of, is maybe more interested or not, as, mileage may vary. But yeah, one of the things that I thought was really cool about this world is that Arcavios isn't like sanitized in terms of using magic for violence, or how we were talking about, like, it's nice to see a set which doesn't treat magic as like a purely battle affair. Like they're not just using magic to fight each other all the time.
Yeah.
But actually, I think the potential for that is there. Like when Nasari and Rootha are kind of squaring off near the end of the story, and Nasari's baiting Rootha into kind of, getting her emotions up and letting loose that kind of elemental blast that they turn into a piece of artwork. It's very clear that the choice for certain mages to use their magical tendencies for performative feats and sort of, directions is a choice. It's not just like, that's the only magic you can do. Like if you're a mage, you have the potential to be like a weapon, but actually you choose to use it for artistic endeavors. And I think that's just a really cool, like, detail that I don't know if it was explicit in what they were trying to do, but it's something that I read into.
I think maybe the thing that undercuts it is, right, that because it's a school for mages, that kind of makes you think in your mind that they're going to be learning magic from like toddler age, whereas obviously this is clearly like a finishing school, right? I think what we get from, especially talking about her having this amaranth liqueur in her dorm, that clearly they're all of age. I feel like Strixhaven is one of these places you can only go once you've kind of matured, and you can start making your own choices about life, kind of thing. Obviously there is a certain expectation that Rootha specifically has to follow through on, because she's the fifth generation of mages that's come through. But I think there's also maybe something to do with Arcavios, the way that the magics clash. They're more likely to be explosive and erupting, but because it seems like it doesn't seem like there's much magic out in the sticks, right? The little story we saw of Luca when he's out trying to get some food in a local inn, it doesn't look like they're very magic-y kind of based around there. Whereas
I kind of got the feeling that they do know magic, because Luca makes a comment saying, "Oh, is everyone on this plane a mage?" But I think it's the same kind of thing of like, I can go for a jog, but I'm not going to run at the Olympics. Do you know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like there's much more magic in this set rather than, say, swords. Like there won't be as much sword and shield training, right? There's not as much like combative like weapons training. So I feel like that's where the line is when you go to Strixhaven. Yes, you are probably looking to create magic that can potentially maybe be destructive, but it's all supposed to be like constructive means, right? It's practical application for magic. It's magic being used for art instead of art coming from magic, right? Like it's all the normal subjects, but magic's kind of enhancing them rather than learning the magic subjects. So yeah, I guess it flips it around that way. And yes, I guess it is interesting seeing an orc, someone who's doing trying to, especially in a school that's kind of like about balance, right? It's a lot of her artworks, you see her with both blue and red magic going around her. And in the story, you don't really necessarily see that. It seems to be quite like she has a very specific brand, right? Even the statue that we see when she first goes to her dorm, where she's saying that's likely to be the thing she shows to Ulvilda for her critique. It's a splash of water that she freezes in the splash. And that kind of that kind of is quintessentially the kind of magic that she does, right? It's abruptive, it's abrupt, like a messy kind of magic. And I think
Yeah, she's definitely in the red sphere of Prismari mages, right?
yeah, and I think that's a really cool. It's really cool to see that she's almost caught between the two deans, right? And I think this was something that I've really liked. The fact that we got to see, because it makes complete sense objectively that Nasari, the flame, Efreet, should want to be working with an orc who's clearly all about. She's got this wild, fiery kind of magic inside her. It's like, why is Ulvilda even interested? That makes no sense. Of course, it's for the benefit of the money, right? And it kind of shows this. It kind of it has a little undercurrent, right? The seediness, this almost like maybe Exodus was right kind of thing. Of maybe there is this nastiness that kind of below the surface. Or I mean, with any establishment, it's not all going to be good or all going to be bad, but it's kind of Strixhaven was presented almost like, hey, look at this perfect school, and actually, it's there's even proof in it about there being like elitism, right? Because it says at one point, Ulvilda is okay, as senior mages go. I've met much worse, sitting through parties full of my mother's friends and admirers, enduring hours of gossip and backstabbing and social climbing. Now that's starting to feel a little bit like the typical thing you'd hear on like Torrizon, from Ixalan of where, or Ravnica or any of these other places of where there is this clearly this social hierarchy, right? This accolade. Like maybe Strixhaven isn't looked on nicely by the average person, so where all the posh twats, go to study up and get their money and get their fancy jobs.
It's very much like, and I know the set designers and a lot of the people who wrote for Strixhaven were trying very much to emulate the American school system, but like I can't speak for the American school system because outside of pop culture I've not gone through it myself, but it does very much feel like if you're talking about here in the UK, there are elite colleges. I know there's the Ivy League in America, so I know it translates fairly similarly, but yeah, there is this idea that you can go to Oxford or Cambridge or Oxbridge as it's kind of colloquially known in the UK, or some of the higher sort of universities, and
like Eton or something
like
that.
like Warwick or whatever. And although like to a person, you're not an arsehole if you go to those schools, because actually more often than not you find it's people who are there on grants or scholarships because they are talented or they are exceptional or they are they did well in their interviews to get in and they deserve to be there. But there is always this kind of slight narrative with these kind of higher schools that you're only there because say your parents went there or you had someone who kind of bought your way in. And that is similar for Rootha, like where you're right, Dina Vilda is kind of presented that throughout the story, seems to be concerned with the idea that Rootha's mother and the family, because they are famous, successful, wealthy artists who have done well at their craft, they bankroll a lot of the college's work because they donate to the college. So if Rootha's not doing well or isn't happy or is maybe on the verge of being like, she would technically have to be kicked out if she didn't turn anything in, so they're really trying to get her to turn something in so they have an excuse to keep her around, even if it's not that good, then, they can keep the money rolling in. But I think that's kind of nice that we get to see the fact that Rootha we'd never really have an opportunity to see her trading in on her name. So it's not like she has to actively reject the fact that she's a Squallhart. She's just dealing with like the fact that she has her own kind of shadow that she's under. Because I kind of feel I'm slightly done to see like there are lots of stories in media where you see someone who kind of pretends not to be from a famous family so they can get away with it. Rootha's not pretending not to be from a famous family. She's just trying to do her own thing. Or, this is her discovering that she needs to try and do her own thing. But she can still kind of do it in the same sphere. I kind of feel, though, and this is kind of me, again, sort of being on the other side of the kind of argument on this one. Again, I sort of feel like the blue versus red, the same way that we were talking about Will versus Rowan in the main stories, that the blue side of things is getting a bit of short shrift in these stories as being like the evil one, like, oh, they're just concerned about money and they're like tight-assed and all this kind of thing. And I have to sort of say, and we sort of said this when we were talking about the colleges overall way back when we did our world building episode. It's all very well, and it's a lovely romantic idea to be like, red, expression, do what you want to do in the moment. Art is for like the now kind of thing. And like, believe you me, if I was in Prismari, which is probably the college I'd be in, I would probably, just through my own strengths, be in the red sort of pathway, if you like. But you need the blue. Like, you can't... Like, do you think lighting technicians just go, oh, I'm just going to throw a lamp up there and we'll see what happens? Like, no, they spend hours looking at like color swatches and theory of light and like which lamps work for which thing, and like
they'll also look at like staging and where people are going to. You have to cross your learnings together, right? It has to be a broad understanding, and it does very much seem that they're setting you up to be a one or the other. And this story does that even more because Orvilda, as you see, there's no redeeming features for Orvilda. There's very little in terms of instruction. I mean, there is this one nice point of where she kind of gives her a little like emotional upbeat, right? It's almost like she gives her like, oh no, don't worry, it's fine. And she was almost like expecting to get schooled and she doesn't. And at that point I think that's her simping on Rootha because of the whole money situation. And then Nasari comes along and then kind of fixes everything, right? The stern mentor that's actually got a heart of gold, right? It's a little bit cliche, but it's also quite nice. It balanced. It didn't feel wrong in the story, right? It felt balanced enough in the story, even if it was a touch cliche, because I wasn't expecting the story to be quite so soft or for the story to go in that direction. But I do think it's a shame that if that's all we see of Avilda, turns out she's just a money grabber.
Well, no, I didn't read it as that. I think that's what the story was. I think that's what Rootha thought. And I don't know, again, I think there's a lot of this story, which I'm not sure was intentional, whether it was that I was reading into certain bits and bobs. I feel like Rootha, because Rootha is petulant in her own way of saying, well, I already know what's wrong in my work. But there's two ways you can read that. You can either read that like Rootha is talented enough to spot the flaws in their own work, which, like, I mean, you're going to be the only person in the world who can. Like, everyone's hard on themselves, but really, like, sometimes you can't see your own work for what it is. Or the other way to read it is that Rootha is so paralyzed by the fear of failure or the fear of not living up to her mother's legacy that she won't allow anything of hers to be critiqued, because she knows that, as is the process, it will receive a critique, and she doesn't want to have that because she wants to be perfect, or she wants to like not have to be compared to her mother's work, who she knows is perfect. Like, it's said throughout the story. Like, there is a point when Nasari says that she doesn't like Rootha's mother because she was your friend when she needed something, and then she would dismiss you when she didn't, kind of thing. That's the kind of attitude we get about Samara Squallhart. But there's no doubt that Samara is literally an artistic genius. Like, it's said several times throughout the story, and it's never disputed. So if that's the kind of ideal that you're having to like be compared to, you're never going to want to have anyone say, oh, you can tweet this, you can tweet that. But really, it's Rootha. Rootha is there to learn. And that's at the very end of the story. The last line is Nasari telling Rootha that she's a long-term investment. So she's not perfect. She isn't there yet. So I kind of feel with Avilda, we're not seeing her necessarily trying to just, get money out of Rootha's family. I think it's that she genuinely wants Rootha to turn something in for critique. There is that added thing of saying, yes, like, we need to see your work so we can, keep you in the college. Yeah. But also, and I know I've been flying the flag for Avilda for about 5 minutes now, but there is also, again, to go back to like the blue way isn't always the bad way. The college clearly needs the money. Like, where are they meant to get this money from? From donations?
No, I completely. I mean, I made it make her sound like she was callous. I don't think she is at all. I think, one, she's Vidalcan, right? So there is a degree of
she's Jinn.
Is she Jinn? Oh, she's Jinn wizard. Yeah. Okay, so that makes it even more complicated there, right?
Although that's in the story. Sorry, just to cut in because I'll carry on. There's I think I've noticed there might have been quite a lot of details changed around at certain points in the card gallery and in the stories, because at one point it mentions her fin being ruffled, and I think maybe at one point either Uvilda was always meant to be a merfolk, or
right?
The detail is just incorrect. But on the cards, they're a Jinn, and it doesn't matter for this story. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, no, it doesn't matter at all. I mean, I guess that also makes it because it's again. We kind of get a deliberately like nebulous line about how the Efreet are quite indifferent, and there's something about them that's that's not quite so impulsive, right? Which is funny because from a Efreet point of view, I'd expect them to be more impulsive. But I guess once you get to like, the psychological metaphysics of Jinns are quite difficult to fathom as it is anyway. So it's not as like against her at all. And again, it's probably the blue way, right, to do it through the Dean of Perfection is going to say, right, even being nice about it, you still have to bring me something to mark, right? And I guess it's interesting to see the tug between the two different deans, which I imagine they do with quite a lot of students. Some students don't need the attention, right? But some of the students will require the deans to step in and go, like, look, you need to really focus in this direction or that direction. And Khalili Nasari, even from the get-go, can I just also mention that him hiding in the flame right at the beginning was so good, was so cool.
Nasari.
Sorry, they. I did say he. I didn't mean to say him. The fact that there's a little flame and Rootha notices it immediately, right? And whether Ilvilda noticed it or not isn't mentioned, but the fact that Nasari's willing to spy on the other deans' critiques and meetings is kind of funny. It makes me feel like there is a little bit of flexibility at the school, right? It's not so strict, and the deans kind of do get to do a little bit of what they want, you know, for better or for worse, which I think is really nice. And I think it's very clear that Ruth was struggling in the circumstance. And as an orc, and from what we see from her throughout the story, it makes a lot of sense why Nasari needed to kind of take control and ownership over Rootha, because I don't think she was doing well with Ulvilda, you know. And I think that's what they kind of set it up here, that dichotomy between the two of them.
Yeah, I kind of get the feeling that Ulvilda was probably assigned for Rootha because of Samara's like perfect nature.
Yeah, I reckon they requested it. I reckon the team might have requested it.
It's just the dichotomy between the style of magic, because they mentioned throughout the story episode that the Squallharts have a distinctive style of magic that Rootha's not displaying necessarily in her work, or she's not excelling at that style of magic. And it's, you know, it's like all 5 of these stories actually, to some degree or another. It's about finding your own way and discovering the path that you're meant to take, which is it's the college experience. It's that kind of stereotypical, like,
and the fear that comes with that, right? When there's the expectation.
I just feel like because we're seeing it from Rootha's point of view, you do need to switch up your kind of objective reading of some of these characters, because you're seeing them through the eyes of Rootha, right?
I guess, yeah. And I guess that's maybe another thing that maybe threw me off a little bit with this, is that it's a very personalized point of view. So you have to be a bit, especially when we only get to see an aspect of these characters, it's maybe a bit frustrating to have, say, like a hot-headed orc kind of showing, the blue character being like this. And you're like, well, actually, maybe, obviously, given the third person point of view that you normally see, you get a little bit of the thought process of each of them, right? Or the reason why they're doing it, or the reactions of why they're doing it, which can be a bit busy and distracting at times. But sometimes, maybe this allows for some of the deliberate story notes to get lost in because, again, if Ruth is thinking what she's thinking as an orc, which is a very strong way of thinking, it might not give both a balanced opinion, as it were. I do have one gripe that really annoys me, and that's in all of Rutha's artworks. In any of her artworks, does she have bangles on her wrists?
No, I did think this as well, actually. I did try and look
so
for it.
Frustrating. Yeah, and none of them, and you do get a lot of her artworks in this in the article, which is obviously, I think they do that for all of them, and you do see a lot. You don't realize how many of the artworks they're in until you see the art and the story articles. You're like, oh, of course, this one. Obviously, you bring up the 2D cartoon effect one, which has got like a paintbrush in her mouth. Yeah, that's a really cool artwork, and obviously that was an obvious one. But there are other ones within the article. But yeah, none of them they have bangles. It's almost like a point, it's like a nervous tick that she messes with her bangles because to stop her from messing with her claws. And then there aren't any bangles. Obviously, there's an artistic difference there. I'm not too fussed, but it did annoy me when you see it literally like immediately under a picture where she's not wearing bangles, and it talks about the bangles. I don't know why that's the kind of thing that irks me. Alongside, why call her Squallhart when
Squallhart?
Yeah, I mean, I know that I'm not the only FF8 fan out there. It was just really distracting to have Squall Lionheart's name concised into a surname. I don't know why. Again, that, and it's because
maybe the writer's a fan. Who knows?
I hope so. I do hope so. It's just the 6th word, and immediately makes me go, oh, cloud. And then also maybe it makes me think of the Seed Gardens. So maybe that's actually a bit of deliberate cross paralleling. I don't know. Aysha, if that's what you're deliberately doing, that's very clever. Okay, claps.
Let's talk about Felicia Fang or Felicia Fang. I don't know quite. I'm going to go with Felicia.
I like Felicia. Yeah. Felicia sounds fine.
Yeah, Felicia Fang. So this was a character. The actual card for Felicia Fang of Silverquill is in the Silverquill Precon deck. So we actually do get a card for Felicia, which is pretty cool. I like Felicia a lot. I think she's very cool.
I like her a lot. I like the fact that she has Mentor on her card, and she's specifically a Vainglory, which a wordsmiths that specifically encourage or pull down people. The more I hear about Silverquill, the more dangerous it sounds, right? Like the fact that the words are powerful without magic attached to them, right? And I do like the fact that we do get this little hint of the two of them having a potentially intimate relationship. I do like the fact that we get to see the that when they choose their colleges, there might be a bit of separation between people that were like friends, maybe in their opening fresher year when they were first years and didn't have to choose their colleges. Like that little bit of explanation is quite nice. I don't know if I believe that Orvilda did send her over to her at all.
Interesting.
I don't know. I think they deliberately left it out of confirmation because I think it would have diminished Felicia's own potential only like view in the story as to being this conniving like silver tongue kind of person. What I do really like is it talks about the outside of the world a bit more because she's from the other side of the world. Rootha says, right, from the Fang Clan mansion, which the Fang Clan sounds great anyway. I wish her surname was a bit more advanced than just Fang.
Yeah, right. It's a little bit.
When you give Rootha Squallhart and you give a vampire the surname Fang, but again, we don't know the metaphysics of the vampires. Maybe they're all just one specific. Maybe it's a spell that went wrong, similar to like the Markovs, right? If it was a reaction to try and fix a medical problem, that would be interesting to find out going forwards because they don't seem like they're particularly cannibal, or particularly vicious like they are.
No one seems to be worried about a vampire suddenly draining someone of blood. Like in Zendikar, the vampires are actively pushed onto another continent because people are worried about them.
Yeah. Exactly. So again, I think vampires, it's nice to see the diversity again on Strixhaven, but the hows and the whys we don't necessarily know too well yet. So I mean, that's obviously up in the air. But getting the idea of the calling them a vainglory, as you say, it does make them feel a little bit less benefactory in the way that they say things. I don't think there's much of Silverquill that feels super. I mean, we get a lot of mentions of how words of encouragement, and I can imagine like a church on Strixhaven being run by a bunch of white Silverquill mages, right? All of the white Silverquill mages, and a few maybe will all hold white mages, and I can imagine like the hymns and everything they sing must be unbelievable. If dramatic finale is the kind of thing that you can do in school, imagine what you can do outside when your abilities have come to full fruition. So I do like this way that they talk about it, the way it kind of they mention how it touches different parts of Rootha's body before she notices that it's actually not her, right? And that must be really gut-wrenching to know that the positive feeling that you have about yourself is fake because you don't feel it often.
Sure, but then there's a line that Nasari says, because they talk about Felicia, Nasari, and Rootha. And Rootha, I'm looking at it now, Rootha says, I don't like having my emotions toyed with. Nobody does. Some people must, I say. Otherwise, no one in Silverquill would have a job. Nasari's eyes burn even brighter. But does one visit a vainglory because they want to, or because they've no choice? So there is an aspect to this where, you know, I truly believe, at least in the world building for the Silverquill, that yes, there's a lot of negativity towards them and the fact that they can use words to tear others down and to kind of change the mood of a room. But I absolutely have faith in their ability to uplift or to help people work through trauma, whether they want to or not, kind of thing. Yeah, therapists, kind of thing. Exactly, all that kind of shit. And I as much as it is, there is an aspect of it not being the person's own will that's maybe getting them there. I mean, come on, we all live in the real world where we know that sometimes we can't see the wood for the trees of our own emotions or whatever else. And it is kind of heartbreaking that we have this character who clearly was so close with Rootha at one point, who is potentially using their magic against Rootha. But then I could be proven wrong, and I'd love for the author to kind of, you know, contact me about it. But there is an element of the unreliable narrator of this story, and it could very well be that Rootha was just not imagining that Felicia was doing it, but maybe projecting, not allowing herself to let her friend help her in a way that she knew.
Exactly. I mean, some people need, there are literal real world drugs that help people think the right way when they go through a slump or whatever like that. And for all we can see out of Felicia, even when she snarls once Rootha gets offended and kind of attacks her back again. For all intents and purposes, it could be for good reason, right? And she just wants her to see the good within her and the confidence within herself. Obviously, Rootha being an orc, and maybe this is where the orc kind of comes through. Yeah, she's very hard-headed about a lot of the things. Like, she could have had much calmer reactions to most things, and she clearly takes the harsher reaction in every conversation that we see her with, in both with Orvilda, Nasari, and with Felicia. But she each time there's an abrupt kind of end to the conversation, or like she does something she lets her emotions get the better of her, right? So yeah, I think there's definitely an argument for Felicia not necessarily being conceited in what she's doing or it being a bad thing, and it's nice to see again, maybe if the writers are trying to go, hey, look, Silvercore can do nice things, we're immediately going, well, you shouldn't make people feel happiness. That's not okay. That's not
I
necessarily
guess,
helpful from the Silvercore point of view, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one, isn't it? I mean, that's a debate of the whole human experience, isn't it? Of like
Agency is an important thing.
yeah. When is it like is it the ultimate, or is it something that has gradients? And God, we're not going to figure it out in this podcast, at least.
No, of course not.
I did enjoy the fact that their relationship was something that was kind of never pinned down to one thing or another. It was kind of a fluid relationship between the two of them. It's never explicitly stated one way that they were an item at one point, or they're just friends, or they're friends now. Like, it's a very sort of grey, hazy idea that these two characters are kind of close to one another, because that really spoke to me in my own experiences at university. Like, I mean, we went to university together. There are people that throughout the 3 or 4 years that we were there, that you would feel incredibly close to one night, and then the next night not so much, and then in other nights, you'd be quite intimate with, or even have sort of like passionate feelings for, and then you might not even remember them for months later, like when you leave like university or whatever. Like, these kind of connections, when you're in such an intense situation, like finding yourself in a sort of away from home educational system, when you're with your peers and you're discovering things about yourself and about everyone else and this, that, and the other, like, it just felt like a very natural relationship. Like, you don't have to have every character be madly in love or be mortal enemies. It can.
I thought it was really nice. I think it was nice for a vampire to call an orc pretty. It's not something you necessarily expect. Again, like, there's this expectation, right, of vampires being like hoity-toity and orcs not necessarily being the prettiest, like by standard fantasy tropes. And it's quite nice to just have a vampire turn around to an orc and say you're pretty multiple times. That kind of intimacy and closeness is something you necessarily see between a vampire and an orc, and it didn't feel unnatural in any way, shape, or form.
It was as far as just fantasy tropes go, you're right. It is kind of an odd one. It's not like the Odd Couple kind of thing. It's just genuine affection shared by two characters who are linked in some sort of way or another. I liked it. I thought it was cool. Talk to me about the Fury Gale.
Right, so this is the little excerpt they say about the Fury Gale. So they're walking down. What was the name of the street?
Opus Walk.
Opus Walk, which, by the way, fucking awesome name. I like the fact we keep getting little avenues and places in Strixhaven. Strixhaven seems like a really, really cool place.
It's like a town.
I could love them to do a D&D book for Strixhaven. I think that'd be really, really cool, because it feels like it's got a lot that you can kind of pull out of it. But yeah, they call it. So they go down the Opus Walk and they get to the end, and beyond is darkness interspersed with hazes of magic. Fury Gale, a graveyard of abandoned projects and half-cast spells that were not happy to surrender themselves back to their base particles. Now, this is the kind of metaphysics that Nathan lives for. Like, so not only do we have mascots, right? So, okay, take away pests, which are, I mean, with the bloomer, in my mind, are probably the meanest, right? Because they actually seem to birth these little pests and then actually like kill them and squelch them into potions and stuff.
They're ingredients for their spells. Like, you can't get around it.
Whereas, like, the spirits, okay, they're the old remnants of the past students or scholars or whatever, or some of them are just have been spirits for God knows how many years and still live like a normal, I get quote unquote normal life. Whereas things like Inklings and the Fractals and the Elementals from the Prismari, like how much consciousness do you put into them? As a spell, is it an idea of a consciousness? Is it? Do they have feelings? Do they have intentions? Are they just like? And then once you're done with them, what happens? Like, so I like the fact they kind of address this, because if you do make all of your magic a little bit more tangible, a little bit more expressionist, and have a little bit more personality, I'm glad they at least threw this here of where, I mean, we still don't know that exactly what's happening with the magic of Strixhaven. We know it's two clashing planes together, and the snarls are kind of the way that the enemy colours fuse together. We don't know anything about ally colours or how they work. Obviously, we don't see it within the set, but it's interesting to know that they do understand that with all this magic that's going on in the school, because there must be thousands of spells cast every day, that there is like a mitigating kind of response. There is like there's residue, right? There's an aftermath, and the fact they left it into the Fury Gale. Now, I could imagine going back to Strixhaven in a few years' time, and this being like the crux of like the story, right, of where they let the Fury Gale kind of go for too long, and it all built up into one like storm of emotion and regret. Because I mean, like, one of the big things about the story is trying to find your place in the world, right, and trying to be proud of what you do, trying not to be stuck, knowing your place in the world. And that's a lot. There's a lot of frustration, negative opinions when it comes to like adolescence, and especially if they're able to just do whatever spells they want. I mean, God knows they've got all of these crazy spells locked up into the biblioplex. I wonder how many of these books have been looked at. They've sneakily done the spell. A little bit of that spell was kind of snuck off and sat, you know, in the Furigale. Like that to me is really interesting. And the fact they didn't need to in any way, shape or form kind of highlight it in any way. It doesn't help the story in any way, shape or form. It doesn't benefit or further the narrative. But it gives something to talk about and it's something to think about. And I just really like the idea of it. And the fact that the end of the story ends with Rootha, you know, like screaming this spell into the space that just holds form there. Like for me, those are the kinds of things that I find really interesting not psychologically, mentally. I can mentally picture it a little bit more, you know, and I feel like it world builds way more than trying to explain like a whole history of a building or something like that, just to show that this kind of thing happens, because it gives you kind of context for all of the other stuff that's going on. Yeah, really cool. Again, they didn't need to do this. They didn't need to say it. And even in the first of the 5 side stories, they're doing so much of these extra little bits of world building, talking about the other side of the world, talking about hierarchy, societies, and then like the way that the magic sits, and about like, yeah, that this did everything and more that we probably wanted from these story articles, right? If they just give little hints at the world beyond what we already know to allow ourselves to expand on them in our own headcanon.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I think that is what they're using these side stories for. I mean, we already knew that, but I guess it's still taken even 3 sets to kind of get used to the idea that the main 5 story articles per set are going to have some quite, you know, maybe slightly rushed, get to point, main story, push the main narrative forward, get onto the next Phyrexian, get onto Casmina, forming a, like, Gatewatch, whatever other theories we have, and whatever else. And then they just need to keep pushing forwards. And then these side stories are where a lot of the sort of more classic storytelling is going to be, which I still don't know if I prefer to the slightly older model. Say, whenever I think about the structure of web fiction, I always think about Shadows over Innistrad. Because Shadows over Innistrad, the very first story were the 2 werewolf hunters going about their business, and then in that story they meet like a planeswalker here, they see a little flash of Emrakul there, but it's kind of under the surface. And then the next one we see Jace going off to see Liliana, and then in the next one it's another little sort of story, so it kind of alternates and peppers through. And I don't know whether having this kind of distinctive cut in between the 2 like story arcs, if you like, is better or worse. I just know that for this set specifically, I got everything that I wanted out of a Strixhaven weekly story article out of these side stories, whereas the main narrative, I was like, cool, main narrative, Liliana was boss, the rest of it, whatever, you know?
I completely agree. I think it does. I think the main story probably suffers more because it's not. And even it's funny because I don't even think the main story necessarily got more narrative time in the previous structure, but maybe each of the individual stories, even if they weren't focusing on the main cast, still helped inform the main narrative. Whereas these again are completely separate. So the main narrative story, probably they're going to reduce it down anyway. Again, we're down into single block structure, so they know there's not as much story to fill out, and you don't need to do as much to make the story feel like it happens. You know, like the Strixhaven story was big enough and it happened, and it felt like the set could carry it. But then all of the other little bits and pieces that we kind of feel like we need, because we're not going to go back there for a while, these are very necessary. And I don't mind the main story kind of suffering a little bit, because, you know, it wasn't always handled well. And even when they did giant great arcs, it kind of, you could get lost in the details. There was issues with the canon because some things didn't add up properly. So many different voices trying to say the same Jace or the same Chandra, and you end up getting a very muddled view of these characters. Whereas if you do it in little bursts, it's a little bit more clear, and then you can do this side stuff. And I think it's better for the side stuff to be important when each set's going to have its own individuality, instead of doing a 10-year arc, which is, I feel like, what they were doing before. Like, I don't feel the modern structure supports big sweeping stories, so I don't mind this, because it means at least you still get a nice concise story, whether you like or don't like it. You still get to chime back in with all your planeswalkers, see what they're doing, get a little shot of Luca, get a little shot of Narset, you know, you get to see people in and about doing what they're doing, but then you still get to focus on the idiosyncrasies of the plane and the little things that let you, you know, love that plane maybe more than the last one, instead of going like, cool, let's see what Jace is doing this time, and not really giving a shit about the backdrop.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, web fiction, man. I'm so happy it's back. Every time we do one of these, I'm just like, oh, we so much to talk about. It's so cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. We're not going to do, by the way, guys, we're not going to do one of these for each of the side stories, because I don't want to do this for 5 weeks, ?
Yeah.
So this is us kind of essentially acknowledging that the fact that side stories exist, and it is maybe a little bit sad that the side stories for us are maybe more our jam than the main stories, and this is the one that we're doing like a sort of smaller breakdown on. But there we go. It's also worth noting when we were deciding which story to kind of talk about, it's worth kind of mentioning that after sort of much discussion in the community, and this is something we mentioned in a few episodes back, that Killian U's story, the Silver Quill Mage, was kind of under scrutiny for some of the tropes that were used for him, being from an Asian background. A lot of the tropes used for his story, notably the tiger parent, quote unquote, trope, was seen by many to be slightly lazy and a bit too predictable.
It was definitely insensitive, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
I think it's worth noting that the Magic team have actually admitted and put a statement up saying that they rewrote some aspects of the Killian U story, which was the last of the side stories to be released. Obviously, without reading the first draft or the first iteration of that story, we won't know how much they changed up, and also how much they could change up, because Killian shows up in a couple of other stories as well. He shows up in the Witherbloom one, and obviously the story on the cards have already been printed. So I wonder if they just softened some aspects of the story and uplifted other ones.
I'd think so,
Who
because there
knows?
was even like a parental thing in this story, and that's what made reading this story back again made me realize, like, oh, okay, if there was this kind of focus of ancestry, right, of living up to an expectation, they probably would. They only leaned on it a little bit here, and there was a question of it, and that is a big part of the school vibe, right? Especially when you're paying a lot to go to a college and getting what's it called when you get when the college pays for all of your stuff.
Scholarship.
Scholarship, thank you. Right, yeah. So there's definitely this feeling of like scholarship and expectation, subversion, all that nonsense. And I reckon they probably used the Silver Quill one to kind of lean into that side more, and then obviously the backlash allowed them to then change it up. So seeing the perspective of Rootha, I think this is all you need to kind of see, and it's probably obviously a very good thing that they dialed it back. It's just interesting that they had to do so. At least they're willing to, at least they're willing to scrub back and understand that there is an audience out there that you need to make happy.
Yeah, I think listening to community feedback and doing something about it is absolutely the right direction. It's still debatable as to whether, getting to that point was probably not a good look for them, and B, whether they did enough to sort of retroactively kind of change up what they were doing with it. To be honest with you, the reason we weren't going to do the Silver Core one is, quite frankly, we're not the best place to talk about that kind of stuff, and we would have to do it at length. What I would suggest you do, people listening to this podcast, is go on your social medias and look up for people who are talking about this, who are better equipped to do so, and learn from them. Cool. I think that's going to do it for our discussion on this story episode. My brain's just fallen apart at the very end.
It's been, so we're at the end of like a long bank holiday, right? And we're both getting back to busier schedules. Now I completely understand my brain's also falling apart. That's why it's quite nice to do this. It was nice. It's really nice to engage with an individual story and then kind of see like the ramifications it has for the rest of like the plane, and then the rest and the rest of like the game as a whole. I think it's really nice. It's a nice breath to kind of get in and just immerse yourself in a little story, have a little paddle about, a little splash, and have a little natter about it. Because we both tend to look at things in slightly different ways. It's also a narrative thing, which is also very interesting. Again, having stories back is just nice. It's just nice to have it to talk about.
100%. Next time we do the MTG Book Club, we will endeavour to do stories from maybe a little bit way back. I know there's a couple of stories, Nathan, that you want to have a little look and tackle. And there's also been story suggestions from our listeners, so please keep those coming in. You can send in suggestions for our MTG Book Club episodes to our Twitter. That's the main way, at mtflavouring. Flavouring spelled with an O and not a... Oh my God, how do we spell it? O-U.
with
oh
a
my
U.
Gosh.
Not only an O.
We spell it... FLOURVING. What?
Flavouring. No. Oh my God! How much of your brain fell out?
Enough. I can't even. I type the word flavouring about 15 times a day, and I can't remember how it's spelled. It's spelled the British way.
Amazing.
At mtflavouring. Emails go to mtflavouring. That's with an OU at gmail.com. My personal Twitter is at AndyManface. Nathan's, yours is
at the Fox in the Moon.
And yeah. Thanks very much, guys. If anyone's been playing the Strixhaven Commander decks as well, hit us up with what you think. I absolutely adore the Prismari one, but not everyone does, I've discovered. Some people think it's a bit too janky, or maybe a bit slow,
really?
which it is.
I
Yeah,
think
well,
it's a Marmite thing. So I've either seen it done either absolute bonkers stuff with a little bit of tweaking, or it's difficult to kind of sequence effectively, which might be why it's getting that kind of like it's a bit slow and sluggish kind
well,
of
and
thing.
also you want to hit those, like, it sounds really dumb to say it. It sounds almost like I don't know how to build a commander deck. You want to be hitting those 6 mana spells at like turn 4, like, and consistently be casting 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 mana spells as like your par for the course. Whereas with most Storm decks, you're like 1 mana, 2 mana, 3
You're
mana at a
cantripping
push if it's good.
Jixaxian Probe and stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Whereas this is
Yeah.
like ramp, 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 hit someone with like a 10x spell, like, you know, expansion explosion for 15 or something stupid, you know, win the game that way. And I absolutely love it. And you've been having fun with the Silver Quill and Lawhold decks, right?
Yeah, I got to play the Silver Quill. It's just, it's so funny playing an Orzhov deck that's like strangely aggressive. Not aggressive like your Karlov deck where you can stack a bunch of counters on it through life gain. Like, it's just generally really aggressive and it's got a load of tricks in it. Again, I can't sing it. We're like, what, 2 weeks after release now from them, and I can't speak their praises enough. Like, there's just such an interesting bevy of options across all of the legends and even in individual cards. Like, yeah, I've really I mean, you've mentioned this week, like, the fact that no one seems to be mentioning, like, oh, well, it's not exactly got the best reprint equity. It's like, no, but it's a much better deck than they've built in years. And I'd much rather have a deck that what plays better, especially like trying to bring people into the game or trying to teach people into the format or try and teach them how to play a slightly different way of playing the format. It's a much better way than giving them a clusterfuck of cards and going, hey, there's like several different directions you could go in, you know, and there's some really cool powerful effects in it, but because of that there's some absolute wank in there. Like, there was very few duds in any of the decks. It was very hard to take cards out, you know, that weren't things like the Impetus Cycle, which was actually a very engaging way to fuck people's game plans up in Commander. So yeah, gosh, great work, Kevin.
Yeah, 100%. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us. The last thing for me to say is thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.